call connected. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The Emperor simply sat there looking at Kenny through the hologram. No advisors, no officials, no military officers, just him. The ruler of humanity looked older than he had a week ago. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of tired that came from carrying entire civilizations on your shoulders. Eventually, the Emperor broke the silence. I watched the broadcast. Kenny nodded. The Emperor leaned back in his chair. It was a good speech. The compliment didn't seem to land. Kenny looked away. The Emperor noticed immediately. Still carrying it? Kenny laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because the question itself was ridiculous. 5 million. The words hung in the air. The Emperor nodded. I know. No. Kenny looked directly at him. You know numbers. You don't know their faces. Silence. The Emperor didn't argue, because Kenny wasn't wrong. The ruler of humanity sighed. I know enough. Another pause. I've buried armies too. The room became quiet. The Emperor stared out a nearby window. For a moment, he wasn't a ruler. He wasn't a king. He wasn't the Emperor. He was just another man who had lost people. You know the funny thing? Kenny looked up. The Emperor smiled sadly. I used to think leadership got easier. A pause. I thought eventually you'd get used to death. I thought after enough years it'd stop hurting. The old ruler laughed quietly. It never does. The statement lingered. The two sat in silence for a while. Eventually, Kenny leaned back. You calling as Emperor or as a friend? The Emperor immediately answered. Friend. That got a genuine smile. A small one, but genuine. The Emperor pointed toward him. Good, because if I was calling as Emperor, I'd be yelling at you. Kenny blinked. What? The Emperor folded his arms. You personally led the attack. You were on the front line. You nearly got yourself killed again. The ruler of Reach rolled his eyes. The Emperor pointed. There. That exact eye roll. Another pause. I hate it. Kenny laughed. The Emperor continued. Do you know how many people would panic if you died? A few? The Emperor nearly stood up. Your wife would probably set half the galaxy on fire. Kenny laughed harder. The Emperor continued. Darius would kill people. Probably. Pines would absolutely kill people. Definitely. And Lyra would help. Definitely. The Emperor pointed triumphantly. See? The tension eased slightly. For the first time since the destruction of the world, the conversation felt normal, human. The Emperor eventually sighed, then became serious again. Listen. Kenny nodded. The Emperor folded his hands. You're doing well. The ruler of Reach looked unconvinced. The Emperor continued anyway. You lost 5 million. A pause. You didn't hide from it. Another. You didn't blame anyone else. Another. You took responsibility. The Emperor shook his head. You'd be amazed how rare that is. Silence. Kenny didn't respond. The Emperor smiled. You know what House Rain would have done? The answer came immediately. Blamed somebody else. Exactly. The Emperor nodded. Instead, you stood in front of the galaxy and apologized. That's why people follow you. The words settled heavily. Not because they were flattering. Because Kenny knew they were true. Eventually, the Emperor stood. The conversation had run its course. Before disconnecting, he paused, then looked directly at Kenny. I mean this. The room grew quiet. If you need resources, ships, support, anything, the Emperor pointed toward himself. Ask. Kenny nodded. I appreciate it. The Emperor smiled, then finally disconnected. The hologram vanished, leaving Kenny alone for perhaps 10 seconds. Then his communicator chimed again. War Council, scheduled, immediate. Kenny exhaled slowly. Time to move forward. Hours later, the main strategy chamber was filled. Celine sat beside him. Lyra occupied her usual seat. Pines arrived carrying food. Nobody questioned it anymore. Darius stood beside the tactical display. The old warrior looked exhausted, but focused. The holographic star map illuminated the room. Dozens of worlds appeared. Trade routes, military routes, supply lines, fleet locations. The entire war laid out before them. Darius pointed toward House Rain territory. Their response is predictable. The room focused. The older man continued. They're scared. They just won't admit it. Several red markers appeared. Military relocations, fleet concentrations, defensive structures. The old warrior nodded. They're pulling inward, consolidating, preparing for siege conditions. Kenny watched carefully. Everything matched his own analysis. Celine folded her arms. Their economy is collapsing too. Several new markers appeared. Trade losses, supply shortages, civil unrest. The Queen pointed toward multiple systems. Entire sectors have stopped trading with them. Their resource deficits are becoming severe. Lyra nodded. They're bleeding. The room became thoughtful. Not enough, but they were bleeding. Pines suddenly looked up from a datapad. Huh. Everyone ignored him. Pines looked again. Huh. Nobody responded. The man frowned, then finally looked up. You're all going to care about this. Darius sighed heavily. What? Pines pointed toward the screen. The next Eclipse games are in 11 years. Silence. The room froze, not because it was important, because suddenly everyone realized how much time had passed. 11 years. Only 11. The last eclipse felt both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Kenny stared at the star map. The memories surfaced. The arena, the bunker, the twins, the first challenge, the final challenge. Winning. Everything. Darius laughed quietly. I was younger. Pines pointed. We were all younger. Lyra smirked. You still act the same. I do not. You absolutely do. The room chuckled. The atmosphere softened. For a moment, they weren't rulers, or generals, or veterans. Just survivors. Pines leaned back. You realize somebody is probably entering Eclipse right now? The room fell quiet again, because he wasn't wrong. Some kid somewhere was probably dreaming about glory, about winning, about becoming the next champion, completely unaware of what it would cost. Kenny shook his head, then returned his attention to the map. Phase 2. The future. The war. The room slowly became serious again. Darius activated a new set of coordinates. A world appeared. Then another, then another. Potential targets, potential opportunities, the next moves, the next battles. House Rain had drawn blood, a lot of blood. Now Reach would decide how to answer. The chapter ended with the 5 of them gathered around the glowing star map, planning, learning, adapting, and somewhere deep within House Rain territory. Lord Rain unknowingly waited for the next move from the sun he could no longer control.